All right, I'm free, I have my mic, and I want to tell you about three aspects of happiness. I know that time is very short, but I think they're important and they will complement what we've heard so far this morning. So the first item, the evolutionary basis of happiness, a bit of an insight into the cognitive mechanisms, and then the social dynamics, which I think cannot be left out of this discussion because they are very, very important. So I start, geographically speaking, not very far from here. So right now we are here, and I want to point to this location about 200 kilometers away, small village in Greece. Can anyone guess what it is, where the flag is in Greece? This is Stagira. This is where Aristotle, the great Aristotle, was born, who of course made, I think, a key contribution to the philosophy and science of happiness, which I think still stands. Some of his conclusions and advice still stands to the present day. So to condense his insight into just one phrase, one sentence would be to say, I think, that to attain happiness, humans must live a life that befits human nature. Well, for that we have to address two questions. One is, what is happiness, to attain happiness, and the second is, what is human nature? And I think too much of the research, including scientific research on happiness, has been concentrating on the first question, what is happiness, and really not enough on what is human nature, even though philosophically and historically speaking, and also with regard to the arts and literature, human nature is probably something that we can find a lot of insights about. And again, especially in science these days, cognitive science, cognitive psychology has been progressing, and we can find, we know some things about that. So with regard to the first question, what is happiness? Well, it has many components, but two major ones that can be singled out are the moment-to-moment happiness. This is the emotional quality of everyday experience. So I can ask myself right now, how happy am I? And actually, I'm pretty happy right now. Right now, right here, I'm pretty happy. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably around 9.5. The half that is missing comes from this insistent knocking on the window here. I don't know why it is happening. Otherwise, I'm perfectly happy. So this is the moment-to-moment happiness. And this is complemented by the life evaluation, which actually is the question that makes it usually into surveys such as the national and the international surveys. So life evaluation, typically on some scale, people respond with regard to how satisfied they are with their life as a whole these days. So this is looking back. The first aspect then is emotional, it's momentary. The second is also emotional, but it spreads over a longer time, in fact, over the entire lifetime. So that's a very quick take on the first question. What about the second one? What is human nature? Well, this is quite a question, right? This is a matter of self-knowledge. And there are, of course, two kinds. There is the universal kind, which is, I guess, what Aristotle had been concerned with mostly. Then there's the individual kind. So we have to know about what we are as an animal, as a kind of animal, as a species, and we also have to know, each one of us has to know oneself individually, and that is the province of another science, a branch of psychology. So in religion and philosophy, self-knowledge, of course, played a very prominent place. So here's a famous picture of the temple of Apollo at Delphi. This is where the prophetess would sit and dispense prophecies. And when you came to see her and you asked for interpretation of some dream or just an advice of how to be happy, the first question you'd be asked back was, do you know yourself, what you are? And this famous maxim, gnothi soton, know thyself, has been inscribed on the lintel over the entrance to the prophetess's lair. So this is in Greece around 6th century BC. And interestingly, around the same time, the Buddha, the enlightened one, developed his teachings, which some people think to be religion, but I personally think are a kind of philosophy. And it starts with the so-called four noble truths, which are about what we are. And I will not definitely, I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into that. But it is about, the Buddha's teachings are about self-knowledge. Around the same time, interestingly enough, 6th century BC. And moving to the farther east from here, Lao Tzu, this is not his actual name, this is his description as the old master. And I have this wonderful quote from him which goes, knowing others is wisdom, knowing the self is enlightenment. So we know in all major philosophical traditions, religious traditions, and I only mentioned 3 here, self-knowledge is important. But there's a twist on this question, because religion and philosophy and actually literary and artistic takes on self-knowledge, they're all fine, but if you want reliable knowledge, you have to go shopping for science. There's no avoiding that. So I tried to squeeze everything I think I know about the science of self-knowledge into a very short book which came out earlier this year. The title is The Happiness of Pursuit. It's a paraphrase on a phrase which actually is very famous from the United States Declaration of Independence, where it goes, the pursuit of happiness. This is supposed to be one of the inalienable human rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I turned that phrase around because I think science can tell us a bit or two about these things, and what it tells us, one of those things it tells us is that it's the pursuit that makes us happy, not actually the attainment of the goal, which is why this would be a proper translation of that title. So this insight has an evolutionary basis, and I'm going to try to cramp all of that scientific insight into just one slide. So there it goes. One slide. The main idea is forethought, the notion of forethought, of anticipating the future and thinking ahead. Of course, forethought in Greek is Prometheus, and this is one of the more famous statues of Prometheus in New York. So here it goes, four points, 1, 2, 3, 4. The first point, the first observation is, in evolutionary terms, the best cognitive skill is forethought, predvidlivost. Why? Well, we can discuss why. I can really try to convince you why, but I have to go over those 4 points, so I'll just leave you with the first one, move to the next one. So given that forethought is the best skill to have, you can ask what it depends on. What does it depend on? How can I predict the future? I can only predict the future by knowing something about the past. So forethought depends on learning from experience, which is possible because the world is sufficiently predictable. From that, it follows that because evolution is at play, there is this process which regulates cognition as it does everything in biology. There's this famous saying, Theodosius Dobzhansky, nothing in biology ever makes sense except in terms of evolution. Given that evolution is in play, it makes sense that evolution promotes the emergence of systems, cognitive systems, minds, that are good at the pursuit of future goals based on past experience, and that stay motivated by rewarding themselves for this in the present. So it's not enough to know what your goal is. You have to be motivated for it, especially if it takes some time to attain the goal. There has to be some kind of proximal, some kind of close to you bit of motivation, and it's all emotional. This is actually the cognitive role of emotions in our existence. One of the roles is to motivate us. So the pursuit of future goals is made to be fun now because we evolved for that. You can put it another way. The more proper way of putting that would be creatures that evolved to reward themselves with a bit of emotional pleasure. They are actually better at pursuing their goals. There you go, the evolutionary argument in a nutshell. And for humans, these emotional rewards include, first of all, occasional feelings of happiness, and second, sustained positive life evaluation, those 2 kinds of happiness that I mentioned before. So this is good news. This capacity for moment-to-moment happiness and also for long-term happiness is built into us by the processes that gave rise to us, by evolution. This is good news. But there's another side to this coin, which reminds me of this, by now, pretty old joke about Yeltsin, the Russian president of a couple decades back, So he was asked at some point, Boris Nikolaevich, как ситуация? How would you describe the situation in one word? He said, good. About 2 words, not good. So the not so good news is there are additional factors in play. Our natural tendency to be happy is counteracted, first of all, by personal hardship, and second, by socioeconomic inequality. Again, I'm singling out just 2 factors out of many. Just as we are evolved to be happy, the world also, in many senses, conspires against us, including our society, kind of conspiring against itself so as to make our happiness not as free as it could or should be. So I want to link the hardship, the inequality, and happiness, and I want to do it via a quote from this is the cover of the Lonely Planet Guide for Bulgaria. And there's a quote here which goes, a new affluence is apparent in the trendy international boutiques, upmarket hotels and less savory casinos, and flashy cars with blacked out windows. But there are also great inequalities. And speaking about casinos, I noticed a very prominent one smack in the center of the town. I walked a lot around Sofia the past several days, and I saw some of those things firsthand. And I want to zero in on one aspect of this phrase which I find perverse. Of course, Lonely Planet, they don't hire probably famous psychologists like the Coca-Cola company does to make their message smoother, but I think it's very funny to say but here. I don't know if all of you can see here. There's this linkage here saying but. There are flashy cars with blackened window, but there's also inequality. I think it's funny to present those two as opposites of one another. I think flashy cars with blackened windows actually are a sign of inequality. And I think therein lies the problem. And I also think that we are kind of lied to. I mean, we tourists are lied to by Lonely Planet because they put it in this misleading way. And I think the media in each country, the media to itself, lies to the public in many respects. And I want to mention this maybe a bit briefly later on. So the first factor, the personal factor that links wealth and happiness or unhappiness. So here you have income. This is from a recent paper in the National Academy of Science by Dan Kahneman and Angus Deaton. Annual income from $10,000 to $160,000. This is essentially happiness. There are 2 kinds here. The thicker line is the longer-term happiness, life evaluation, and the 3 thinner lines are the more instantaneous ones. And basically, I want to take you home I want to take home from this picture just this notion that the richer you are, the happier you are. It's true that things flatten out with regard to the instantaneous happiness. If you're richer than $70,000 a year, approximately, it doesn't matter anymore. But it's really a terrible thing to say to someone who lives on the streets that, money doesn't buy you happiness if you're richer than $70,000 a year. And for life satisfaction, for life evaluation, actually, there is no flattening out. So I think it's this lie that we are being fed to, including by some national and international reports, that the happy proletarian, the happy pauper, the happy beggar, just if you don't believe the data, just look at this painting, this illustration to Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Match Seller. So wealth has a strong impact on happiness. The same is true for inequality. This is from another recent paper from last year, which links on the horizontal scale here is the so-called Gini coefficient, which measures the inequality in the society, the economical inequality in the society. And this is mean happiness. Each point is for a year. So this is the survey that looked at the last 40 years or so in the United States. And for each year, they put 1 point in the proper location where that year, particular year, belongs on the inequality scale and where it belongs on the happiness scale. And you see the trend here. There's a significant correlation. It's a negative correlation. The more inequality in a given year, the more people feel unhappy in a given year. And there's actually a wonderful analysis there which starts in that paper, which starts to disentangle some of the causal factors behind the situation. And they write in summary that if the ultimate goal of society is to make its citizens happy, then it is desirable to consider policies that produce more income equality, fairness, and general trust. And actually, the perception by people of the amount of fairness and general trust in their society is the factor that mediates this effect. The more trust, it's not so much the inequality as such, not so much someone being very rich and someone being very poor. It's the perception that the rich are rich because they swindle us. So why society matters, of course, you can buy into any of the many revolutionary theories, but actually there's some science in support of that. I want first, well, I don't have the time to mention the science. I want to do a little bit of philology here. There's one take on the origin of the modern Bulgarian word for щастие, and this is the old Slavonic щастен, sometimes is derived from сопричастен. And if that is true, that taps into a very deep truth that many other cultures have been aware of. In Indian and Buddhist philosophy, there is notion of the Indra's net. Each entity in the universe is like a jewel that reflects all the other jewels in the universe. So translating that to people, we now know that a person's mind does not end at the confines of the person's skull. We spill over from our skulls. Right now, I'm talking to you. I'm actually now causing differential gene expression in your brains. Not only I'm causing some of your neurons to fire, as they would not have fired had I shut up, I also cause gene expression. I mean, I'm meddling with your genetic processes right now. It's not the procreation-related processes, just gene expression for mind function, right? But it's happening, so we are interconnected. So there is a saying in African folk philosophy to the same effect: a person is a person through other persons. This is the Zulu version, which I will not presume to try to read. So if a person is a person through other persons, what does it mean for this project of improving people's deal in life? Although we are not all equal in our abilities, I want to stress it, we are not all equal in our abilities. So even though that's the case, there will be a conclusion on the next slide. I want first to draw your attention to this cartoon. One of my favorites from the New Yorker magazine. It says here, what are you complaining about? Presumably the tiger saying it to the rabbit. What are you complaining about? It's a level playing field. So a level playing field, this American expression which stands for, which codes, actually codifies fairness. So if you have a soccer field and it's tilted, obviously the team at the lower end is kind of a disadvantage. So we say in the States, we should really strive for a level playing field. But look, on a level playing field, you know, life is not a game of soccer. Life is more like that. If you give me and the guy who rides like here in the street in a car with blackened windows $1,000 and come back in a month, he will have $10,000. I will probably have less than 1,000, less than that. Because we are not equal in our abilities to, you know, put money to good use or whatever. If you level things, and there have been experiments on a vast scale in leveling things, and we all know about that. You know, I should tell you a secret. I was born in Moldova, just one republic over from here. Okay, I grew up there until the age of 16. I saw not, of course, the big event, the big leveling event, but I saw the repercussions and the outcome. If you level the playing field, that's not enough. And if you do it over and over again in every generation, what you have is basically a level field of rubble, because we are not all equal in our abilities. So, but even though we are not all equal in our abilities, I think we must be all equal in our rights. So here's a picture from a recent demonstration in Washington about healthcare being a human right. This is by no means a popular sentiment in my country, which is really surprising. We did have a turn to the better. There was a very surprising ruling just the other day, 2 days ago, by the Supreme Court, which upheld this law that tries to reduce the degree of inequality with regard to healthcare in the United States. We right now have about 50 million people without health insurance. These are people who are one, even moderate, doesn't have to be major, one moderate health event in their lives from total financial ruin. And this law, which was partly upheld by the Supreme Court, which is stocked, thanks to our last couple Republican presidents, with deeply conservative people, this court upheld a large part of the law, but it struck down the provision that would offer through the states, through the individual states, the 50 states, insurance to people who cannot afford to buy it. So it will reduce the number of uninsured from 50 million to maybe 20 million in the country that's supposed to be the magnet, you know, for the entire world and light unto the nations. What this means is, I think, that many so-called democracies, including my country, are actually plutocracies where money rules. And freedom, which has the pride of place in our Declaration of Independence, maybe also yours, it cannot mean simply freedom to be homeless, hungry, and without health care. This picture is from the news back at home from a couple months ago, a homeless veteran coming back from a war, of course a totally unnecessary war, back home to Colorado, living in a tent, and of course he's very patriotic. He has a flag next to the tent, but I think it's really a disgrace. And this plutocracy defends itself. It doesn't let the understanding of the root causes of the situation to percolate through to the majority that could change the situation. So when propaganda fails, the plutocracy uses force. This is from a recent demonstration against Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin back in Russia. This is from a demonstration in Tel Aviv just a week ago. The same cause for the demonstration, social inequality, and the call by unarmed people, peaceful protesters, the call upon the government to do something about it. This is what is being done to those people. And this is on the campus of one of the University of California places in Davis. This is UC Davis. This guy, this makes me really angry, spraying, this is like mace, you know, pepper spray, on a line of students, part of the Occupy movement from last year. There was a big outcry. Of course, everyone got really angry. Well, not everyone really as angry, not everyone also not as angry as they should. This guy was fired, but the chancellor of the university stayed, and the situation, well, is not good. What should we do? As I said, we, and I include myself in this assembly, we tried the revolution, and we know where that led. And there's a nice slogan here by Charles Eisenstein, which inverts part of that old slogan. So love actually happens to be contained, if you just look closely, in the word revolution. But I wish things were that simple. Here's another graffiti by Banksy. You may have heard about Banksy, the famous graffiti, almost anonymous. His identity was revealed very recently. Graffiti artist. If graffiti changed anything, it would be illegal, and unfortunately, that's true. And if my waving my hands around in this forum were thought to be effective by the people in charge, I would be taken away by riot police. So, decide for yourselves how effective my preaching is going to be. But still, these are the days of happiness. I want to finish on what I think is a positive note. I want to quote just one paragraph from the book by Farid ad-Din al-Attar, who was born and died in Nishapur in the 12th century, what now is Iran, The Conference of the Birds. I want to, instead of recounting this in my own words, I want to use the story as it was told by one of my favorite writers, Jorge Luis Borges. This is an English translation in collaboration with the author. So, The Conference of the Birds. Allow me. The faraway king of the birds, the simurgh, drops an exquisite feather in the middle of China. Weary of their ancient anarchy, the birds determine to find it. They know that their king's name means 30 birds. They know that his royal palace stands on the Kaf, the circular mountain which surrounds the earth. They undertake the almost infinite adventure. They fly over 7 valleys or 7 seas. The next to the last one is called vertigo, the last annihilation. Many of the pilgrims desert, others perish. 30 of them, purified by their labors, set foot upon the mountain of the Simurg. At last they contemplate it. They perceive that they are the Simurg, and that the Simurg is each one of them and all of them. I'll leave you with this parable, maybe still ringing in your ears, just to ponder it. Thank you for your attention.